welcome all of you here. It's been a wonderful turnout. Obviously attributable to our wonderful panel. Our panel on Women in Words for Women Are Empowered, the theme this year, are from my left, Mary Swander, who is an associate professor in the English department, does primarily poetry and nonfiction. And if you all don't mind, I'm not going to try and memorize all the titles and run through all this. But we'll find their works, or what's left of them that haven't already been purchased, on the back table, except for Ferns, who's here on my closest left. And Pat Miller has said to announce that
No,
Ferns...
Joe just went to get some books. I have some in the office.
Well, we were going to tease her and tell her you can pick them up at her home any hour of the day or night. She'd be glad to autograph it for you. And in the middle is Jane Smiley, whom I think you've probably also heard of, novelist who has a brand new hot book coming off the press, and she's the only one that's got it in the room, entitled 1,000 Acres. Actually, all of the writers are very well published and very well known, and we feel very honored at Iowa State to have them, and especially honored for Women's Week to have them speaking today. So,
Okay. These noontime things are a little rushed, and I know people have commitments at 1, and we were all going to speak, about 15 minutes each. And Jane just said, no, I think we should speak 10 and leave room for questions. But we'll stay later then. If people have to sneak out at 1, that's fine, and then we could stick around a little more if you want to talk. The brochure here, can everyone hear me in the back? Yeah. Okay. The brochure, I noticed, said 3 noted Iowa State University authors will discuss the creative process of writing and living in Iowa as writers. And I thought that syntax, I don't know who's responsible for the sentence, but I thought the syntax was strange because it made it seem as if living in Iowa itself was a creative process. And maybe, in fact, it is. I don't know. The 3 of us are writers. We are also friends, and we've spoken on the phone, I don't know, at least a half a dozen times this week. And my stepdaughter left a jacket at Jane's house, and I called Mary for something else. And occasionally we'd say, we should get together and talk about what we're doing today. And we didn't, actually. We just ended up gossiping, as women tend to do. And so Priscilla gave a talk the other day, Priscilla Sage, and she showed a slideshow, and she said, there's no pattern here, this is just a collage. So we're all speaking fairly individually. It'll come out together, but I think you can think of it as a collage. I'm going to talk briefly about 2 things. The first is how physical landscape, where you live, where you are, informs your writing. And I was thinking of this when Jane gave a reading from her new book at the English Club the other day, and it began with a very beautiful and lyrical description of Iowa. And we have regional writers whose place informs their writing, certainly. Someone like Nadine Gordimer is a spokesperson for where she lives. But I've lived in Iowa for 20 years. I am not a native Iowan. Some of you might have guessed that listening to my speech. But actually, this is the longest I have ever lived in a place. This is my home. This is where my friends are. This is what where I choose to live and stay, and I like Iowa. But I don't think of myself as an Iowan. And so I was thinking the other day, well, then who am I? And I thought of myself, perhaps the title should be A Respectful Visitor. Even though it's my home, and maybe I'll live here for the next 50 years, but I don't feel that sense of Iowanness. And after Jane read from her book, I went back and I picked up Before and After Zachariah, which was my first book, which is nonfiction. And indeed, I have some lyrical Iowa writing. 2. But again, I'm just going to read you a page. It reveals itself as someone who is the respectful visitor rather than the indigenous, homegrown person. Fall in Iowa. Along the road, the tractors and combines ride through the dark fields. They are painted bright red and yellow, like kids' toys. The farmers make the interminable ride up and down the earthy rows, eyes under their John Deere caps, squinting squarely against the dusty glare, slashing and turning the rich soil up and down, back and forth across the acres, hour after hour under the autumn sun, Midwestern Zen. We lived a decade in Iowa. Now it's 10 more years. I wrote this 10 years ago. I still don't know a soybean from a rutabaga. I still don't. And I have not made the effort to make distinctions. My own backyard farming ventures have been half-assed but plentitudinous. A few tomato plants out behind the garage when the neighbors remind us it is time. Over the perennials, rhubarb and raspberries, we have no control. They spring up untended, and guiltlessly we eat these gifts. There is something good and healthy about living in the midst of growth and reproduction. Even if I do not myself have a yen to go milking and digging or baling, I like the agricultural landscape. People from the coast complain about Iowa. You all know these people. About the stretches of flat cornlands. There's nothing to see, they lament. No mountains, no oceans, nothing startling or provocative, nothing to take your breath away. That's true, I guess. But for me, the ride home from school on a sunny autumn day is a small pleasure. The farmland has a bountiful beauty, undramatic but dependable. I remember the time, first fall in Iowa, I saw a TV commercial for Boar Power. Two pigs spot each other across a grassy meadow. And as Tchaikovsky swells in the background, they race towards each other, desire in their chubby loins. Fade out before the consummation. Then a voiceover to describe how you too can raise these sexy pick-of-the-litters if you use. Oh, I laughed then. Campy, yes. But something so touching about that porky passion. I wasn't going to read that last paragraph, and I came to the line, porky passion. I sort of wanted to say it. I sent it. And so I actually surprised myself because I hadn't thought about that until Jane gave her reading, and I thought, sure, I use landscape too. Being in Iowa affects what I write. The second thing that I'd like to talk about, for me, is how the personal, the individual, and the intimate are reflected in my own writing, both in my nonfiction and my fiction. Fiction comes from many different places. For me, it always comes from a true place, and then I lie about it. But nonfiction, too, the articles I write come from stuff that's very intimate to my own life. The journalist Myra Manns once wrote, "Women are always accused of taking things personally, but I, for one, don't know any other way to take things." I became a writer because I had a second child who was severely handicapped. I had something that I thought was very important to say. I wrote an article for Redbook about what happens to a family when you have a child that's very abnormal, and what happens to your own self-esteem and how you view yourself in the world. And I got hundreds of letters from women all over the country, women who came out of the closet, who said, my child too was not a gift from God. I'm very angry. This makes me very sad. That was the first thing I wrote, and that is indeed what made me become a writer. So for me, the very worst thing that happened in my life helped to become the best thing. One of the best things that happened in my life was to give me a writing career. When you are a writer, your personal life, and you use your personal life, other people, it intrudes on other people. I was writing a fiction story for Redbook once, and I was living alone with my daughter. It was right after I was divorced, and she was a teenager. And she was a little self-involved. She's very nice, as my friends all know. Nothing's wrong with her. But she would come in the house, and the first thing she would say is, "Any mail for me?" rather than, "Hi, Mom." But she had this one move that I used in this story, which was she just got her own phone, a teen line phone. And her door would be open in her room, and she would pick up the phone with one hand, and with her foot, she'd kick shut the door. And I remember being in the hall once and having the door, as the phone rang, shut on me, and thinking, she was really putting me out. And I wrote a short story where the teenage daughter was described as sullen and tenaciously ungrateful. And Redbook bought it, and I had left it out. The galleys had come, and Gabby read it, and she was very upset. And I said, "Gabby, it's fiction." And she said, "No, I know. You always tell your students writers write about what they know." And so she was very upset, and I called the editor of Redbook, the fiction editor, who must have been a mom, and I said, "My daughter's really upset about this story." And so they published the story, and at the end of the story is my name. Fern Kupfer lives in Iowa with a teenage daughter, blah, 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 who is never sullen nor tenaciously ungrateful. So Gabby was very happy when that came out. Two last things about, for me, how the personal is reflected in my own writing. For me, writing has become a way to explain the world and to make sense of my own life and my own values. But it doesn't end with the personal. It always ends up having a bigger and I think a political dimension. When my marriage broke up 3 years ago, a 20-year marriage, because my husband said that he had fallen in love with another woman, I was shocked and I was devastated, and we stayed up a lot of the night talking and arguing, and at 1:30 in the morning, he said he was going to sleep, and he fell asleep right away. And I was up and crazy, and what I did was write an article. So from 1:30 to 5:30 that morning, I wrote an article entitled, "He Says He Doesn't Love Me Anymore." I was feeling very sad then. It wasn't until later that I got pissed off, which is a healthier way to feel. But, and when he got up in the morning, I showed him the article, because he had always read everything I wrote, and he said, "Fern, no one would ever publish this." He said, "It's so," I think he used the word pathetic. Is that a word? What's that? Maudlin, and it's too sentimental. Well, I sent the article to Women's Day, and not only did they publish it, but the editor had called me, and she said the whole Women's Day staff kind of stopped that morning stunned, because they said, if this woman could have a 20-year marriage and be shocked and not know what's going on, and her husband could say, "I don't love you anymore," then this could happen to anyone. Anyone's husband could come home and say this to them. And indeed, lots of husbands did, because again, I got mail all over the country from women whose husbands, in fact, did do those things. And a lot of them were very life-affirming, and they said, "My life changed for the better, and you can get through this." And I really felt like I was kind of in this big club all over America of deserted women. Women's Day paid me $2,000 for that article, and it took me 4 hours to write it, and I thought that was the most money I ever made writing, $500 an hour. Sometime later, I remarried, and a lot of the things that the women wrote to me were true, and I sat down and I wrote myself another article. I think I should give a seminar that says, "Turn your real life into profit." And I don't think there's really a commercial bent to this. I think one of the things that writers do is they pay attention, and if you have certain stuff that happens in your life and you're trying to make sense of it and connect with other people, you write about it. So this last article is called "At a Certain Age, Nice Can Be Very, Very Sexy," and Family Circle is publishing it, this is sweet, on Valentine's Day of this year. And I only have another couple of minutes. I'm just going to read the beginning line and the last paragraph. The beginning line is, I just got married again. My 18-year-old daughter walked me down the aisle, and we both carried backyard bouquets made by friends. I wore a white linen dress. My daughter said, "White? You're not kidding anyone, Mom." But it ends with, and this is part of the point that I'm making, how the personal, how the intimate is political, and how do you make sense of your life. And this is the point that I came to. I wonder sometimes how we can warn our daughters about certain kinds of men. What shall we tell them? That there are the stars, the prom kings, the football heroes, the bad boys in fast cars, the brooding boys whom you will try but never succeed in making happy. These boys can hurt you and can make you cry. They will demand that you will be there for them, but they will not be there for you. These are the boys whose sense of entitlement encourages unfaithfulness. These are the boys who have too much anger at the world, and it will be taken out on you. These boys can, for the moment, take your breath away, but these are not the boys you should marry. There are other, gentler boys who don't win at every game or shine from across a crowded room. They are not macho or rock star gorgeous. These are the boys who notice you before you notice them. The boys who are sometimes a little silly but can always make you laugh. The boys who drive sensibly and are kind to their little brothers and sisters. These are the boys you can be friends with, and these are the boys you should marry. There's something else too, I think, recalling the sweet, lingering kiss right after the minister pronounced us husband and wife that we can tell our daughters, though I don't think they'd understand what we're talking about yet. But it's just that, well, when a woman is a certain age, nice can also be very, very sexy. So on the word sexy, I will give you the next writer, Jane.
Well, I just want to make one correction. We haven't been gossiping. We've been exploring character motivation. And that's an important distinction, I think. Once, a few years ago, Fern and I had books come out simultaneously, and we did a signing at the North Grand Mall. And they came in, just this stream of people came to buy Fern's book, and she signed them all. And one guy finally looked over at me and he said, "So did you write a book too?" And so I'd like to thank you all for coming to see Fern. And I know you're all in some formal relationship with her, like bridge club or reading group. So that's the sign of a person who's become at home, a person with a lot of, a big network of friends. I am not a native Iowan either. I've lived here for 19 years, but I came from Missouri. So I didn't move very far, and I am a native Midwesterner. I too have enjoyed and profited from living in Iowa for all of these years. I came here in 1973 in order to go to the Iowa Writers' Workshop. I probably wouldn't have come to Iowa if I hadn't done that. At the time, I was highly ambitious and intent upon a literary career. And I wanted to go to the most famous place where I had heard that the most people made the most connections, and I went there. I have stayed here for other reasons, and I often think about why staying in Iowa all these years has been a good career move, and I do think that it's been a great career move for me. And one of the things that one of the benefits that I've felt has been that it's enabled me. We had Mary and I were in the workshop together, and we have had a lot of friends who moved to New York or moved to California, places that are more apparently at the center of the literary world. And one of the things that has struck me as easier to do in Iowa than in those places is to separate your work from your career. After I had been through the workshop, I realized that as much as I wanted a career, I wanted a life work more. And that meant that I wanted to write a lot of books, and I wanted them to be serious books, and I wanted to be able to progress in talent and skill and technique from book to book. And that's been very easy to do here. I think when you drive into Ames, especially even more so than into the state, whatever fame that you've had or self-consciousness about that fame kind of drops away, and you're back in Ames, and the most you can hope for in terms of recognition is the checker at Fairway saying, "Huh, I saw that article about you in the paper." And then she never says, anything about what she thought about it, or are you really you, or anything like that. She might reminisce that one time she ID'd you when you were 29 years old, if she even remembers that when you tried to buy beer. I have found Iowa to be a wonderful place to get on with my work and to think about things in a careful and deliberate way. There are a lot of ways that it's simply practical to live down the street from the daycare, which is across the street from the Fairway, which is 2 blocks over from the bank, which is a block or 2 from wherever else you want to go. And I think people underestimate how much your work is affected when you live in a big city and you have to spend lots and lots of time and energy doing just day-to-day life. So that's been a good thing for me. Another good thing for me has been my sense that it is okay to be serious here. It is okay to contemplate the world and life and good and evil and what's happening to the people that you know. It's okay to not be cynical, to not be deeply, bitterly ironic. It's a world that is very much like the world that I grew up in Missouri, and I feel, having been here, that my thoughts on my life and the lives around me have been continuous. They are similar to thoughts and things that I used to think about as a girl. I feel that if I moved far away from the Midwest, if I moved to New York or Washington or California, that there would be a discontinuity there, that I would have to think new, maybe more cynical, more bitterly ironic thoughts about what's happening to the world. That's another thing that I have found important here. I'm sure I like it here because I fit in, because I'm a Midwesterner, because I have family who were from Iowa a long, long time ago, and Missouri is not that much different. But my work has changed. I haven't very often in the past written overtly about Iowa. I think I was writing sort of about Iowa when I wrote The Greenlanders and was writing about Greenland. I was flying in an airplane to Greenland to do some research, and I compared weather the previous winter with the Greenlandic man that I met on the plane, and our weather had been much worse than theirs in Greenland. So I thought, yes, you can write about Greenland and know what it's like by living in Iowa. But I once saw on some talk show a man who was blind said that it took him 20 years to dream that he was blind after he lost his sight. And I think it's taken me 20 years to find a way to write about Iowa and to take that subject as seriously as I think it needs to be taken. And so this is my first book that is overtly about Iowa. I've always been interested in farming and what that means. I feel that farming really is, and agriculture really is at the base of the relationship of humans to the world, and that simply because at one point in our history the base was very broad and the tip was very narrow and the relationship of culture to agriculture looked like a pyramid, doesn't mean that just now, because the base is very narrow and the tip, you might say, is very broad, and the relationship of culture to agriculture looks like an upside down pyramid, it doesn't mean that the base is any less important. And so I think that what I wanted to do was to take up the contemplation of this very important aspect of our world, and I was able finally to do that in this book, and I intend to keep doing it. Unfortunately, in the time that I've lived in Iowa, in the 19 years that I've lived in Iowa, a lot of things have gone wrong in agriculture and in this state. And there's been a lot of hardship, and the health of the agricultural sector has really suffered in a lot of ways. And so this book is not a paean to how great it is to live in the countryside and milk a few cows and walk in the meadows. It is an honest attempt to look at the way agriculture is done now, and I expect that it will offend people here in this state. But my hope is that all the citizens of this state are able and are, even if they live off the farm and have no farm relatives and they live in West Des Moines or wherever, I hope that they can look around themselves and say, I am a citizen of this state. My quality of life and the quality of life of my fellow citizens is declining. And it's important for us to look at why it's declining, and it's important for us to let others know who don't live in this state, who live on either coast, that something is in danger here. And because the culture rests so completely on agriculture, the thing that's in danger is the whole culture, not just a form of family farming or independent operator farming that has been a part of our past and is becoming increasingly, or let's say decreasingly, a part of our future. So for me, to live in Iowa has been wonderful in many ways, and one of the ways is that it has given me a subject that I have attempted to write about. And I hope that when people read my book, they will see that I've attempted to write about it as someone who hopes for positive change rather than as someone who's simply critical and coming from the outside. I don't know how long it takes to become an insider from an outsider, but I consider myself an insider now. That's all for me.
Well, when Fern did call me to talk about the panel a couple days ago, I had looked at the title and it said Women, Art, and Power, and I was going to talk about Latin American women poets. And she said, Mary, they're going to be like people there you don't know in the audience. And that's, a little bit too narrow of a topic, and you're supposed to talk about Iowa. Well, I think I am going to talk about Iowa and what it's like to be a native. I was born in Iowa, a native writer in the state who's still here, which is a pretty rare occurrence. And I think it points to a problem that I'm guilty of myself, obviously, this week, and that is not to take that role very seriously, or not to think of it as with the consciousness that we should. What's it like to be a writer in Iowa? In 1984, there was an Iowa Arts Council conference, writers' conference, and Joan Bunke, the art critic for the Des Moines Register, was giving a talk. And the editor of The Spirit That Moves Us Press got up and said, "I've been sending you my books for the last 10 years, and you have never reviewed one of our books." This is one of the going presses, publishing companies in the state of Iowa. And why is that? And she looked at him and said, "There are no writers in Iowa." Well, by the end of the conference, we had her convinced that there were indeed writers in Iowa. And there are probably more writers in Iowa than anywhere else besides New York or maybe California. We have here in the state some of the biggest writing departments in the whole United States. Of course, we have the Iowa Writers Workshop. But here at Iowa State, we have one of the biggest writing faculties of anywhere else in the country. We have 4 or 5 nationally prominent literary magazines. We have Poet and Critic, we have the Iowa Review, we have the North American Review, and we have Iowa Woman. And we have, I also did work with the Poet in the Schools program and traveled throughout the state for 5 or 6 years. We also have a grassroots interest in writing in our teachers, in our schools. We have children who think it's fun. I was never surprised to see this when I would go from classroom to classroom, that there's a joy, there's a spirit among our children who are very, very interested in writing, interested in poetry, interested in fiction, interested in nonfiction, anything that you would put in front of them. But we also have the highest literacy rate in the country, and we allocate one of the lowest amounts of money to all the arts from our state legislature. We're 49th. We rank 49th in the nation in the amount of money that we give to the arts. That's not just writing, but all of the arts. So there's some kind of image problem, and Fern talked about it. We've got the problem from both coasts, thinking that this is a place where nothing is happening. But I think we have a problem with ourselves in that we must struggle to have the self-confidence, have the self-reliance, self-assurance to come up and say, yeah, I'm a writer and I'm from Iowa and I'm good and I'm doing something that's important. When I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop with Jane, I had to dance through all sorts of hoops because at the time, it probably still happens, there was a policy that they did not admit anyone from Iowa in the Iowa Writers Workshop. And so I kept getting rejected, and I said, well, what is happening here? And they said, oh, well, you're from Iowa. We do at Iowa State admit Iowa students, so let me make you aware of that.
With enthusiasm.
That's right. But since 1984, books are now getting reviewed in the Des Moines Register. Ann Struthers is reviewing poetry and in-state Iowa books that are published by our publishing companies. We're seeing things like Midwest Literature Conference that took place a couple years ago in Des Moines. The people who planned the conference, the Iowa Humanities Board, expected about 60 people to show up, and 360 appeared. So we definitely have interest. But then we have this other problem of what it's like to be a woman writer in Iowa. And there were so few women represented at that conference that several months later the women got together and had a women's Iowa Writers, Midwest Writers Conference. So there's still that overlay of getting recognition as an Iowan and then as a woman. I would urge you to nurture that sense in your state, in your children, in your friends, that we are important. I would urge you to support things like Iowa Woman magazine. That's the one magazine that I mentioned that's not supported by a state university, but they're going around hand to mouth, month to month, trying to keep the magazine going. And to take yourselves seriously as writers, even if you're just writers of letters to the editor or letters to friends. In my own work, I've tried to capture some of the lyricism of Iowa, but I'm really interested in the underbelly of Iowa. And to bring in the humor, the language, the folk customs and traditions and values in the state. And I'm going to finish by reading a poem that I think captures some Iowa values. And this poem is based on experience I had last year when I was on sabbatical. I was living over in Kelowna, Iowa, surrounded by Amish neighbors. And for my 40th birthday, they decided that they would take me out to dinner, which, if you know me, is a little hard in itself. But this process of arranging for the dinner, first of all, took about 2 weeks because the gross daddy with the grandpa had to drive in his buggy, horse and buggy, from farm to farm, gathering up the neighbors, arranging for a time when we were going to go to the Amanas for dinner in the Mennonite Son's van, see. And so he would drive in his buggy in one morning, and then, we'd decide to go Thursday night, and then that night it's not going to work, and he'd go to the next neighbor, and we'd try for Wednesday night. Well, it took about 2 weeks to get this all sifted and settled out. And finally, one dark November night, moonless night, there were about 14 of us squished into this dark blue van and started out for the Amanas on the, get this, they actually have street signs out there now, the Orville Yoder Turnpike. Which is a blacktop road that connects Kelowna to the Amanas. The Orville Yoder Turnpike. And we'd been driving for about 20 minutes when we hit a cow, head straight on. And the van burst into steam, and the radiator broke into a million pieces all over the pavement, and the cow was a Black Angus, so we didn't see it. And it was totaled, and the van was totaled, and we all, started getting out of the van, and I looked down into the ditch, and not only were there 2 or 3 more Black Angus calves, but the bull was down there. But they took out, of course, farmers know what to do in all cases, I've learned, and they took out a butcher knife from under the seat and slaughtered the calf right there and then on the road, took him over to the farmers, hoisted him up, black and tackle, had the whole thing butchered out in an hour. And I enjoyed this tremendously. It was better than the dinner. But what I really enjoyed the most was the Iowa conversation that went along with the whole evening, and the attitude that this is bad, but things could be even worse. So I'll finish with this poem called Luck. Were we lucky? This time a steer calf in the beams, and the moon too low to see, only a shadow across the windshield. Then the radiator spurting steam, the grill and headlights splintering on the blacktop, and the soft moan of an animal not harmed enough. It could have been 20 below. The wind drifting snow against the fence, the hole wide enough to let the entire herd through. We could have been bruised and cut. The children pitched head first into the night, their gross mommy right behind. We could have been charged by the bull in the ditch, Black Angus a blur before us. What matters? We're all safe. No one hurt. the farmer at home and easily found. That's the main thing. And from years of practice, the slit across the throat was firm and swift. The calf bled out before the sheriff even picked up the call. Block and tackle, the butchering was done by 10. The children fed soup and tucked in bed. It could have been a real mess. So much worse. Thank you. So now, if you have any quick questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
We really wish you would ask questions. It always hurts our feelings when nobody wants us to say anything more.
I'd like to know, for all your books and the articles, could you think of them offhand? I mean,
You want me to give you oh, I'll see you later. I don't.
Okay. Jane, for anyone who isn't familiar with your new book coming out, could you give us a brief synopsis of what's about?
Yeah, the subtitle, if it were an academic article, it would have a colon and a subtitle. And it would be called 1,000 Acres, King Lear on the Farm. And that's essentially the plot.
I understand it's about daughters.
Yes.
Farmer daughters.
Yeah, it's about 3 farmers' daughters.
Since you're all artists, I would be sort of curious of how you view the relationship between your art and your teaching.
Well, I think it's a real intimate relationship. I think you cannot teach writing without being a practicing writer yourself. You're working on a poem in the morning and you realize you've made this move or that move, and you come into the classroom in the afternoon and you can talk about that with your students. I think it's something that fuels both disciplines back and forth.
I think it also makes me a more sympathetic teacher, even though maybe my students wouldn't say so if they think I'm hard on their writing. But because I know how hard it is to write and how I put off writing myself and it's just painful. And so I imagine that it's not something that they really like to do. I always like having written, but the writing is difficult. So I think I'm sympathetic to how hard the process is.
I would agree with Mary that it's an intimate relationship. And for me, there are lots of things I know about writing that I enunciate to my students that I don't realize I know until I've enunciated them. So it's been helpful for me to be able to abstract those instinctive bits of knowledge and codify them or make them known to my students, because then they become known to me too. And I often have the experience of mulling over a story that I've written and saying, what's wrong with this, what's wrong with this, and then thinking of something that I've said to a student and realizing that the same thing is wrong with my story that I thought was wrong with theirs.
It also gives you a certain degree of respect. Sometimes I'll give something out that I wrote an article and they say, oh, you wrote this? You know, your name's on this? So I say, yeah.
In fitting was the theme of the week. How does power fit into your life with writing? And Fern's already answered that question, probably at dinner something. Maybe Jane could answer that first.
Well, I think to write, especially to write poetry or fiction, and maybe nonfiction too, is to assert power, because every time you choose a word or choose a character or have a character do this or that, you're choosing, and you're asserting yourself. And in my experience of watching my students write, as the semester progresses, their selves become more revealed and more defined and also stronger. I've had students come in who've had bad experiences in their lives outside of class and that have shaken their sense of themselves. And it doesn't matter how well they write about it, but the fact that they write about it creates a self for them to sort of flow into. And it's very valuable for them. I can't think of anything other than writing that is more assertive of the simple nature of the self. And once you've asserted it long enough, it takes on a kind of power that I think it sort of just happens automatically.
Does it become a substitute for having reconciled that in your life then, perhaps?
Having reconciled what?
Like the assertion that you write?
I don't understand. I'm sorry.
If you write an assertion and it's an assertion of a circumstance or a way of looking at something, then do you, never mind.
Do you mean, do you write about it instead